Good morning. Enter, rejoice, and come in. So glad that you are all here in person and you on Zoom. We're glad you're out there Zooming. I am Becky Tanner and will be your facilitator for today's service. Prior to the beginning of the service, if you have an announcement that you want me to read, or if you have a joy or sorrow you want to express, there's some little forms back there in the back table that you can fill out and bring to the front. And then the first announcement is turn off your phone. I have to do mine too, so we can do without phone calls. Okay. We have two announcements already from Tina. Tina seems to have a lot of appointments for her and her sons this time of year, so the office hours will be on Monday from 11 to 3 instead of Tuesday. It's always a good idea to make an appointment even during the office hours so you won't have to wait if someone got there first. And you can set up a meeting with her for any other day also. We have another announcement here from Roland that free thinkers will meet at 1? 1. Okay, at 1. Okay. Oh, they're not going to be here very long. Maybe so that they can go ahead and leave. Can I do this
yes,
out of order?
Joy.
Yeah. This is my joy of the day. This is my granddaughter Kelly. Raise your hand. My son-in-law John. And Oliver is 5. And the noisemakers, that's Ophelia and Scarlett, will be 2 on Thursday. Yeah. Okay, I'm sorry. Huh? Now they're quiet. Okay. Okay, at this time I'd like to honor all mothers or anybody that's done mothering or smothering or whatever. If you'd raise your hand, if you'd like to be acknowledged. Of course, very good, very good. Of course, I was obviously a mother to get all of that crew.
Also, if you've ever been a grandmother.
Mother, yeah.
If you've ever been an aunt.
And a great-grandmother.
Oh, sorry, yeah, well, I haven't been one of those.
Could I just be a mother?
If you've ever nurtured anything.
Anything, even a dog or a cat.
A
fur baby, right on. So
yes.
we're all mommies.
Yeah, we are. We're all honored.
Okay. On this Mother's Day, I hope we will strive not only to honor our earthly mothers, but also Mother Earth, showing them both that our love and respect is not only the right thing to do, it is the smart thing. In both instances, they and we reap benefits from our actions. That sounds like a win-win situation to me. And so with the lighting of the chalice, we use the words of Reverend Christine Robinson, who served as the Unitarian Universalist congregations of Columbia, South Carolina, and Albuquerque, New Mexico for over 35 years, and currently works as a consultant for large congregations as we light our chalice. We gather this hour as people of faith with joys and sorrows, gifts and needs. We light this beacon of hope, sign of our quest for truth and meaning in celebration of the life we share together. Okay. I hope you will find us a friendly group, and we welcome you to this service and to the refreshment and social time afterwards. We're really good at eating. Okay. If you wish to receive our weekly newsletter, please let me or Deborah out there know, and we'll get you on the newsletter email list. Okay. And now if you would turn and wave at Dave, who's doing the camera for Zoom. Yeah. Make all those people jealous that want to be here. Yeah, you won't get any cake. Okay. All right. Joys and sorrows. We are a covenantal community, and as such, we do our best to support each other in good times and bad. We gain strength by sharing our sorrows, and we radiate happiness when we share our joys. As I read the joys and sorrows written here, I will drop a stone in the water to remind us of how the ripples grow outward, like ever-widening effects that we have on one another in this community. From Tricia, a sorrow. Over the years, some people have occasionally asked me about the tribute development. Well, it is finally here. The first phase of homes, 376 of them, is coming up to the Planning and Zoning Commission on Tuesday. Normally, I would have tried to attend the meeting, although I'm not sure what I would say. The sad irony is that I will be in Phoenix on Tuesday as there is a court hearing before a 3-judge panel of the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. This is an appeal of the ruling in 2022 of the CBD versus U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in Fort Huachuca regarding the 2014 biological opinion. I'm saying all that right? Okay. It's pretty much our last chance. The universe is being cruel right now. So this is a chance to help with environmental necessity. So we'll put a rock in for the stone in for that. Roland says that, oh, I'm sorry. Your sister passed away after a long illness. Our thoughts are with you. And Rita's got a joy. Where's Rita? I know she's here. Oh, there she is. Okay. Rita's got a joy. My son is home from Africa after being gone a month.
No, he'll be home.
Oh, he'll be home for a month.
A year and a half.
Wow. Well, happy Mother's Day. Yeah. And Heather says, I am grateful that my mom put together Ever Mom's genealogy time. Okay, now that I am doing family tree, it's invaluable. Oh, yes. When you get into that, any help from the past is quite joyous. Yes. Okay, are there any other joys? Well, I'm going to put a rock in for my great-grandchildren, my grandson-in-law, and my granddaughter. I don't know who they are. They're just mine, okay?
They're gorgeous.
All right. Okay. For those who have yet have their mothers in our lives, we place a stone of happiness. And for those whose mothers are no longer with us, we put a stone of remembrance of the importance they played in our lives and development. And for those whom their biological mother was not a great nurturer, we lift up in joy for those who supported us as we grew up. And put in a few more stones for anybody else that hasn't said something.
So the story for all, I called it Maria's Miracle. It's from both an article and a chapter in a book that are the same, published by Julian Agon. He is a Chamorro, part of the Chamorro people from Guam, and he is a lawyer and an activist. And I can't tell if he came up with what he calls the anthem of Pacific climate warriors. Throughout, they've picked up this and they have made T-shirts and they've had conferences, and it's To Hell with Drowning. And that's the name of his article and the name of his chapter in the book, It's Not Too Late, Hope for Climate Change. Anyway, there's a story he tells that is quite lovely. In 2016, there was the 12th annual Pacific Arts Festival. And later I'm going to tell you why Pacific arts are even more important than we might think. But one of those arts is making canoes. And there are groups of people who still make traditional canoes. It's not just a hobby or a pastime, it's a way of life. One of them was Larry Ragatai, and he and a group from Lamotrek, which is about 430 miles from Guam, sailed to Guam in their canoes. So these are their canoes. And and there's a second one? Yeah, more of the people gathering to work on the canoes. One of them was called Lucky Star, and it was sailed with an old-fashioned sail made of pandanus leaves. And as they set out to get prepared, they discovered they'd almost forgotten how to make the sail. There was one person left who knew how to make this. Her name was Maria Labuchela, and she was 90, and she was dying. So she spent the last few weeks of her life teaching other women how to make the sails. And in the next slide, you can see what the leaves look like. And then in the next slide, you can see people working on them, putting them out in a line, sewing them together, putting them up as a sail. They finished after she died, and they were able to sail that 430 miles with her sail that she taught them how to do with a craft that didn't die, because they discovered in time how to do it and how to share it. And Julian writes, the Lamatrekese, the people from Lamatrek, are emblematic of the predicament of all oceanic peoples. We come from cultural traditions rich in beauty and resilience, the same traditions that have enabled us to thrive in our ancestral spaces for thousands of years. But those are simply not enough to ensure our continued survival. The past simply cannot, those parts cannot simply save the whole. The answer to the question of climate change must come from everyone, or it will come from no one, he writes. You could say Maria performed something of a miracle in her final days. With nothing more than pandanus leaves and love, she opened a window to a world, a future in which good people refuse to simply lie down and die, a future rooted in respect for possibility, a future with room for all of us. May we have the courage to climb through it. And that was my reading and story for all. Yesterday morning, I woke up to one of those newsletters. How many people get bombarded with email newsletters from different news sites, right? Yeah. I got one from CNN, and I couldn't figure out who wrote it, but it was, I thought, really appropriate. I think it was a woman, and she said, I don't know why Mother's Day cards are so tough and why it's so hard to celebrate Mother's Day. It's such a tough holiday because there's so much complexity, right? There's so many. How do you sum up as a mother all the feelings you've had? How do you sum up as having had a mother all the experiences and feelings you've had? And they wrote, that's why Mother's Day cards are about 4 pages long and embossed in italics. And I realize Mother's Day for me, if I'm going to do it head on, it's got to be a panel of people. The one time I did it that I felt really good about was when I was taking courses at a Methodist seminary to finish up. My degree isn't from there, but I took courses there. And when we talked about Mother's Day, a large group of women met to plan it. And then we had a large group of women speak. One spoke about the pain of losing a child. One spoke about having a mother with mental illness. We just delved into the complexity of all it can mean. And the best compliment was at the end, a man stood up and said, where I come from in Africa, we believe it takes a village. And I feel like you've touched on all my mothers today. And he was beaming, so I think he was happy. But to embrace Mother's Day, there's so much there. Just the holiday itself, it began in 1868 as an attempt to bring people together after the Civil War, to bring families together, to have picnics. And then, of course, it became a day for peace a few years later. I think it's a day to acknowledge nurturing, being nurtured and being a nurturer and taking care of this world. And for me, the big issue is, how do we take care of our planet? How do we nurture it? How do we let it nurture us? And a few weeks ago, as I was looking at Earth Day, I discovered all this amazing writing, mostly from the Pacific Islanders I was reading about, but also from Native Americans in Arizona, about ways we need to nurture Earth and let it nurture us. First of all, I don't think we can say often enough that we have some blinders on. Most of us here come from a pretty white perspective, have been trained up in Western ways of understanding the world. And this week I found a very compassionate way of describing it. Ronald Trosper, in his book, Indigenous Economics, Sustaining People and Their Lands, talks about how the study of economics was developed in a culture that praised individualism as an antidote to the domination of people by monarchs and religion in Europe. It was a survival mechanism to become so individualistic that you could stand up for yourself, embrace your life, make your life, study, learn, grow. It was a very powerful force for the Enlightenment, for everything that happened in Europe. But just like any survival mechanism we take on in life, it can also restrict us, right? Do any of us have some pretty good survival mechanisms that we've also discovered limiting us as well? Right? Right. You know, my ability to hear has grown as I've had children, but it also means I hear them at night, right? It's amazing. My husband used to be a light sleeper. He sleeps much more deeply now, and I sleep much more lightly. That survival mechanism doesn't always work for me. As a culture, the colonial powers that moved out of Europe throughout the world brought with them that individualism. But most indigenous cultures have a very different understanding of economics and what development might mean. After World War II, we embraced development in the world, right? We wanted the southern part of the world, the whole globe that was underdeveloped, to be developed. And there's certain benefits to doing that, but there are also some huge limitations. People at the World Bank said, well, you can tell if development is happening for 3 reasons. Natural resources are transformed, social relationships are transformed, and we increase the production of commodities. And in indigenous cultures, Trosper makes the argument, those aren't necessarily good things. When you talk about sustainable development, it's kind of a crazy oxymoron. You're talking about something that is within limits, but then development is without limits. Right? How do we think about this in a better way? And over again, the research he discovered, what we intuitively know, is that most cultures in the world start with relationship with other humans and with other beings in the world and with the environment, seeing themselves not separate from that this world is not a mechanical being they can just use for their own resources, but that we are connected, right? It's relational. We have to rethink our way of doing economics to look for increased benefit in our lives. People in South America call it vivir bueno, which is to live well. And if you live well, according to Trosper, you pursue actions that strengthen humanity's relational goods created by relationship with nature and each other. And the added value of improved relationships can include additional material goods and services, so long as the additional material income is shared with all beings in the relationship. The aim of good living is to increase the value of all relationships, even with nature, without harming them. And that's pretty much what he discovers throughout the world, not our Western way of looking at things. In the same book that I've learned to love about It All Is Not Lost and looking at ways to be less despairing about the environmental crisis, Jade Begay, who is Diné, she's a mixture of Native American peoples, she's a climate justice person and an environmentalist. She says, she defines climate justice as building ties between people, their land, their traditional ancestral ways. In all my ways of doing environmental work, this is one of the most succinct ways I've heard to describe what climate justice means for Indigenous peoples and communities. Reconnecting to our land is an integral piece of addressing climate change for both our nations and for the wider community. And she talks about, moving people to boarding schools, moving them into reservations, disconnecting them from the land meant you could then do anything you wanted to the land, and you disconnected everyone from a traditional understanding of the land. Julian Agon, the man I quoted earlier telling us the story about Maria, says that Indigenous people have intellectual knowledge that we need, not just because they've lived with the land for millennia, but that's true, but also because they have survived terrible climate injustices already. So in the Pacific, there's been nuclear testing. There's been, right now in Guam, where he's from, the U.S. military is building up its presence and wiping out forests and dredging harbors that hold the last of certain species and disconnecting people from knowledge that could keep them moving forward. And Jade Begay says, when you allow people to have that knowledge, it benefits everyone. So the Yurok people in California partnered with local fire departments to bring back the ancient practice of controlled burns. And now witch hazel is growing again where it hasn't for a long time. And a few years ago, I talked about New South Wales, a state in Australia, starting to use Indigenous ways, Aboriginal ways of doing controlled burns. They talk about different levels of burns and when you need them. And it's been incredibly helpful for New South Wales. But unfortunately, we rarely consult the elders of the world about huge impacts that are going to happen in their areas. Recently, another To Hell with Drowning conference took place this April, led by Australia National University in Canberra, and it was looking at wisdom that comes out of the Pacific Islands. The elders complained that in the recent AUKUS deal, have you heard about it? It's between Australia, the UK, and the US to beef up our protection against China. But no one consulted with the elders of Pacific Islands. And one of them said, well, how do we know that your submarines, these warheads aren't armed? You say they aren't, but unless you tell us when they are armed, we're going to assume they all are all the time. But nobody consults with them. And so recently they had this wonderful conference. And we know that there is knowledge these groups of people have. So those canoes that were coming over from Lamatrek to Guam use something called wayfaring. Have you ever heard of wayfaring? It is a type of navigation, not just based on the stars, but on layers of knowledge about shoals and even living pods of animals, even seabirds, passed on through chants. It's passed on through chance. So we who come from a Western worldview, it is okay to use science and economics, but it's important to think outside the box as well. For 10 years now, we've been reading Braiding Sweetgrass. How many of you have encountered Robin Wall Kimmerer's Braiding Sweetgrass? She's a botanist, and she also is a Native American she's part of the Citizen Potawatomi Nation. She combines native lore and stories to gather knowledge and share knowledge. And Julian himself says something that is quoted all over the Pacific. We have to share our stories, not just the ones about huge crises, about the waters rising up in the capital cities of many of these atoll nations, but stories about the places we're from, stories about what we love. And that's what Robin Wall Kimmerer has been doing as well. We need science, but we need other ways of gathering and passing the information on. And so at this recent event in Canberra, the professor who organized it all, Katarina Taiwa, says, we need arts. If you are leading a course in the Pacific Island, in the Pacific area in Oceania, and you don't use the arts, you're really not doing it right. She says, we don't all have to get up and dance or sing or chant or draw, but if you don't use those, you're not using our best library. So much has been encapsulated in that. She says the dances, and you can see people dancing, looking like birds, they are to describe the environment and tell the stories of the people. They're not just for tourists. They are our library. There's a science fantasy series that I loved as a young woman about people moving to a new planet and taking the local lizards and making them into flying dragons. And as the people settle in, they realize their computers and their spaceships are going to die. So to pass on knowledge, how do they do it? Through ballads and hymns and poems, things you can sing and repeat and remember. We have to have different ways of collecting and sharing our knowledge. And then finally, people in the Pacific Islands are showing a different way of responding. They're not just lying down. As Professor Katarina said, we're gathered here to remind the world Pacific Islands aren't just part of a geopolitical strategic game that's going on in the world. We exist in our own right, and we have to change the policy and the framework. People talk about us as a place that is diminishing, that is impoverished, that is going to be washed away. That's not right, that's not fair, that's not accurate. And we are not just going to lie down and let that happen. There are a group of young people called Pacific Climate Warriors who are not letting that happen. And a group of women in Papua New Guinea realized in a lot of nations they're thinking about where are we going to go when we're underwater. The leader of Kiribati bought land in Fiji from the Anglican Church. I talked about that a couple weeks ago. They're going to move there. But women in Papua New Guinea know they're going to have to move to Bougainville, another island near. And so they've already bought land, and they've already started a cocoa factory, planting cocoa trees and processing it there. And it's happening throughout. They call it Tulele Pesa, which means sailing the waves on our own, not waiting for other people to tell us how to live or how to be in the world. The issue is, of course, we have to learn to listen. But as Julian Agon says, we can't do any of it alone. We have got to do it together, right? The solution is not by ourselves. So I challenge all of you here. How do you take in information about what's around us? Do you have a relationship with this scary and degraded climate all around us? Are you turning your eyes away, or are you engaged? Are you loving every single spot near you? Are you telling the stories of what you see each year, of how the San Pedro starts to get green long before the rains? I love that. There's so much that happens here. There's so much that's painful that we will lose. One of the writers said, "It is so hard to see my daughter fall in love with the world when so many of the things she loves will disappear in her lifetime." But we don't want to give up on that, right? We need to take in these stories. We need to use different forms of knowledge. We need to share them in ways other people care about. And we need to never give up. We need to ride the waves in our own way. We need to do that together. And I just want to end with these words from Roshi Joan Halifax. Sacredness appears in those moments when life, like a river, like our San Pedro, overflows its banks. When we see the vast, variegated, and infinite network of life, and that we are part of it. I believe more than anything else is given to us when we don't look away, when we still embrace it, as beautiful and sad and powerful as this earth is. The more of the sacred that rests in the very marrow of our lives, the more all beings will flourish. Thank you.
As we extinguish this chalice, we extinguish the fire, but not its light. We take with us out of the world, sharing it with those we encounter on our journey. And at this time, Jean's going to play the postlude.